Bonjour, je m'appelle Sathishka Madushani. Today I am going to talk about an interesting topic. It is about culture cuisine française. In English terms, which means French food culture. First of all, I have divided this. First of all, I have divided the presentation into enough sections. The flow of my presentation is introduction, then history of the French food culture, and then foodie movies. Next, the place in the world of the French foods and French food as a gastronomic, France as a gastronomic country, and French food as a cultural heritage. And next, culinary diplomacy in France, and finally, French food culture as a diplomatic tool. So maybe you have a question why I selected this topic. In my case, I am a graduated student at International Relations at University of Colombo. Therefore, my studies rely on the countries and their diplomacy. So French food culture is a very interesting topic for me. So I like to begin by a brief description. Actually, Les Français are pretty serious about their meals. Their foods rely on simple combinations, rich natural flavors that come together to create delicious, internationally renowned dishes. So, moving on to the next slide. French food culture goes back many ages, since medieval times to the modern era. The historical background of French food goes back to the medieval times. In 15th and 16th centuries, it influenced by the Italy, and 16th and 18th centuries, a restrictive regime holds a culinary advancement. So, and then moving on to the next slide, 17th and 18th century, Le Français published their first true French cookbook. And after that, the French Revolution happened. And then finally, 19th century and mid-20th century, Auguste Escoffier was able to discover modern day French cuisine. So moving on to the next slide, I'll talk about foodie movies. If you are thinking about how foods address the world as a cultural ambassadors, I'm very excited to say that France has most interesting examples. Have you ever heard of the Ratatouille movie? The movie is about a rat who can cook. It makes an unusual alliance with a young kitchen worker at a famous restaurant. So, in a cultural context, ratatouille is a traditional French dish made from several different types of vegetables. But I am not going to explain the recipe. Actually, this movie, I want to say, actually, this movie is a story about race, species, and nationality in contemporary France. So let me turn now to the next slide. I'm talking about the world place for French foods. Well, which place for French foods in the world? It is all about La Gastronomie. La Gastronomie means French gastronomy. What is La Gastronomie? Gastronomy is about much more than food. It reflects the culture, heritage, traditions, and sense of community of different peoples. It is a way of promoting and understanding among different cultures and bringing people together and traditions close together. So we can consider France as a gastronomic country. France is known worldwide for its cuisine and lifestyle. Its gastronomies are known all over the world for its quality and diversity. So let me turn on to the next slide. So we can, as I said earlier, the facts, we can consider French food as a cultural heritage. Why I am saying this? Because since 2010, UNESCO named the French gastronomic meals and its rituals in the list of the intangible heritage of humanity. So, moving on to the next slide, I'm talking about diplomacy culinary. in France, and it means culinary diplomacy or gastro diplomacy is a type of cultural diplomacy, and it is subset of public diplomacy. So moving on to the next slide, we can consider culinary diplomacy as a diplomatic tool France use. So finally, we can consider French food culture as their diplomacy tool, beginning with the iconic French Antoine Caron, and modern French diplomacy gastronomy works with modern instruments and such as online social networks. In conclusion, I like to say French food culture is not just a culture; it is a long-term diplomacy tool that represent France. So here is the end of my presentation, and here are the references. Merci beaucoup.